right. Well, today's a special day. Obviously, I'm not Brian Stevens. I am Paige Walkup, one of the founding partners here at CASA K-12, and welcome to Public Education Unfiltered. Today, we have a very special guest who I'm super excited to have, Dr. Johnson from Indianapolis Public Schools. And I really want to give a big shout out to Bria on our team for connecting us and really drawing attention to what I think is some really game-changing work that Dr. Johnson has done over the last year that I think is exactly what we need to level the playing field for public schools across the nation. And as somebody who has spent a lot of time in the legislative affairs and focusing on community impact, I think that you all, just like me, are really going to enjoy learning and getting some best practices from this conversation today. So let's just launch into this. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
And so let's talk a little bit about what happened in the Indiana legislative, session this year. You all had a lot going on. You want to kind of set the tone?
We had a lot going on. So yes, thank you again for the opportunity to come and talk a little bit about that. It was, a challenging year, certainly for Indianapolis Public Schools. I think we all are experiencing a lot of the challenges across public school districts across our country right now. And we were no different in Indiana. Our General Assembly started their time in January. We were in a budget session. And so this is the long session where they are developing the budget that will be in place for the next 2 years. And also considering lots of other, policies that would impact our state and particularly our schools and education. So they met from January and until April this year. And really our work started as early as sort of October and November, as we started to get a sense of the proposals that were going to be put forward. So several months engaging with our community locally, our state leaders, our school board, to be sure we were both responding to and advocating for policies that would be helpful to the district, and then trying to manage the ones that we knew definitely would not.
So let's talk about what they were trying to do, because what they were trying to do was essentially just disband all of the elected school boards and convert to charter schools, destroy essentially public transportation resources. It really was a plan in many ways to destabilize the school system and families and students across Indiana. So there were maybe 4 bills that were out there that had been proposed. So what did they actually propose, and what was the impact going to be?
Sure. Well, the first bill that was proposed, out of the gate, that really, I'd say, sort of had a shock impression on our community, and really not only our community. There were going to be 5 school districts impacted essentially across the state that would have disbanded the school district as we knew it. Transitioned all the schools into charter schools to then be managed by an appointed board. And so essentially ending the existence of our public school district ourselves. And they sort of set a threshold. So ourselves and 4 other districts across the state would have been impacted by that bill. And that really, like I said, kind of set this stage that made everyone say, whoa, what is going on? There had not been, prior to the bill being introduced, any conversation with our team, with any of the districts about this bill coming forward. And so that got everyone's attention very quickly, very, very quickly.
Was the legislation proposed? Was it a bipartisan proposal, or did it come? It sounds like it came kind of out of the blue too. Was it something? It wasn't something anyone was anticipating.
That's right. It certainly wasn't anything we had anticipated or had any conversation about. It was sponsored by a representative who does not represent our district. He's in northern Indiana, didn't represent, in fact, I believe I'm being accurate in saying any of the districts that would have actually been impacted. And like I said, no consultation prior to that language coming forward, and certainly not bipartisan in nature when it was introduced.
That's such an important part, because paying attention to what's happening on the Hill and those legislative actions and having those relationships with the larger legislative community is so important for superintendents and districts, because of things like this happen. So as you started,
it is, yeah.
I mean, did you all already have some existing relationships that you could immediately tap into when you saw this coming forward and being proposed?
Some, but honestly, we're in Indiana, and so the our General Assembly, the Republican Party is the supermajority in the Indiana General Assembly. We're in Marion County in Indianapolis, where the vast majority of representation are Democratic representatives. And those relationships we have, and they are strong. We knew going into this session that we had some work to do to build stronger relationships with our Republican legislators. And so that is something prior to session started, we were intentional about partnering with the firm to help us continue to build those relationships and have those touch points. And so that wasn't fully sort of baked at the point that this legislation came forward, but we did have the infrastructure and a partner firm with us to be a helpful navigator as it related to the Republican side of the House, and just making sure we were sharing information, we were having touch points and conversations, so that folks had a sense of what was happening, why it mattered, and what it meant for our community.
So I think that's a really important point that you just brought up about the idea of having help and having somebody to help you navigate. Lots of times, I think we don't take the time to get the help and to ask for the help. And so it's exciting that you had that relationship and you were able to take that through, because sometimes you need a Sherpa to kind of help get through the door or to build those relationships. So I think that's another huge lesson there, is being able to identify who can help you get to the legislators and to begin to develop and identify messaging that resonates, that's going to help you get to the win,
for sure,
to protect the students and the families.
That's right. And we made sort of two, I think, in this vein, decisions. One was to bring on a director of external affairs. It's a role that we didn't really have prior in the way that we crafted it in this moment in time. And so really having a person internally on the IPS team who reports to the deputy superintendent, and so is, very much in tune with, the challenges we're facing and sort of strategy conversations and those kinds of things to really help us build our internal capacity was now, looking back on what she was able to bring to our team. Rachel Santos, she's amazing. Was really critical in helping us have capacity that we needed. And then, as I said, partnering with a political affairs, a lobbying firm, who we knew had existing strong relationships with Republican legislators was also a really critical decision that we made, that I think, again, in retrospect, having both of those relationships, partnerships in the capacity was really, really significant for us.
And I think the thing there is really about having the realization that you've got to have those resources in place to be competitive, to be able to make your argument about the value of public schools, and
That's right.
and to really tell that message. And I think that because of the legacy of public schools and the rise of charter schools, there's this divide, and Brian talks about this a lot on the podcast and in his books about, public schools just haven't really been taught to market themselves, to tell their messaging. And so instilling somebody in the team or bringing in outside resources, whether it's about recruitment or it's about public policy, is so critical to protecting the institution of public education. And that, I think, was one of the, I see that now as one of the biggest steps that you did to really stabilize things and to get this message moving forward. Yeah. So you all kind of identified 4 kind of core areas that would be impact areas: students, equity, obviously that issue of control, being the loss of control, and then the impact on the educators. Can you kind of talk about those a little bit and tell us why those were so important and what made them resonate with the legislators so much?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and some of this goes into the relationship with our school board. And so the other thing that was sort of unique to this year that we faced is we had school board elections right prior to session starting. And so we have a 7-member elected school board. 4 of those members were brand new to the board. They were elected in November, installed in January, right?
That's a lot to deal with, brand new.
So there was no easing in. I mean, it was right into the thick of things, right when this bill is getting, introduced that could dismantle the entire district. 4 new board members who, again, are just trying to learn what their job is and learn more about the district. And so it was a really, really challenging time. But we didn't have a lot of time for them to kind of get up to speed. But one of the things that we did do, so once we knew they were going to be the folks sitting in those seats, we started to engage with them even prior to their installation so that they could come in equipped with some knowledge and that we could start to have conversations as a district administration and a governance team about, what do we want to align around? What are the values that we want to bring into this session? We know it's going to be a challenging one. And that was really powerful. And so the board was able to develop these guiding principles that they then put forward to our community around, we know this is going to be a challenging session, and sort of here are the guiding principles that are going to guide our work this session. And that was really helpful because one, we could come back to those things often, and we did. As a superintendent, I could look back to those things and say, here's why we're advocating this way and not this way. Here's where we're finding success. Here's where we haven't. It made conversations with legislators, I think, more clear because we were able to clearly communicate. Here is what is important to us. Here is why that's important. Here is where there might be room for compromise. Here is where perhaps there isn't. And so it made going to those conversations, I think, easier, not because we found, agreement so quickly, but because we were clear on sort of what our principles and priorities were and why they were what they were. And when you have 4 new board members out of 7, that helped, I think, them feel more grounded and anchored in how they were orienting themselves, which ultimately I think served us well.
So how did the board come to those principles? Did you all do focus groups or community meetings, town hall meetings? I'm sure it was a combination of things, particularly with those new members, being able to elicit feedback from the larger community and community partners and everything.
Yeah, I'd say a mix of things. One, you obviously had board members talking to their constituents and getting feedback from their communities that they represent. Mm-hmm. We had a lot of folks come to our board meetings and give public comment.
Oh, yeah.
And so a lot of it came from the comments we were hearing, and they weren't all, in one direction or one way. There really was varying perspectives put forward, but certainly that feedback was very helpful in sort of helping the board make sense of how they wanted to orient and help us as a district determine that. So those are the two primary ways, I'd say, that we on the front end kind of got that feedback. We had also done some work earlier in the year just around what people's values were around, IPS, what we were doing well, what they wanted to see more or less of. And so that wasn't specific to this legislative session, but that was data that we had because we had also were coming off of a massive kind of redesign of our district. And so we had some of that information that also helped shape the orientation that we took.
I think that combined with the resources that you brought in always adds when districts are constantly looking at their values and their principles and what the community's needs are. It makes moving into a legislative action like this so much easier because you're in alignment with your families. And so what's out there. And so that's another important best practice is just where are you in your assessment process of knowing where you are with your mission, all your updated principles, all of those things.
Yeah. And we like these priorities that the board came up with were kind of particular to this legislative session, but I would argue fit into the broader mission and vision of the district, fit into the broader like strategic priorities that we were operating in as a part of our 2025 strategic plan. And so they weren't incoherent. I don't believe. I think they all kind of, you could draw a through line amongst them all, even though their guiding priorities and principles were specific to this sort of legislative moment we found ourselves in. You could attach them to those broader mission, vision, priorities that we have.
Definitely. Yeah. So you all had a ton of partners that were involved with this. I know the NAACP was heavily involved, particularly around the equity conversation and the impact that this was going to have on the primarily African-American districts that had heavily, African-American population and demographics. But there were over 30 partners, community organizations that helped support this across the state. Isn't that correct?
Well, I think if you take into account all of our sort of education associations, both locally and at the state level, certainly here in Indianapolis, there were groups who were engaging either in collaboration with us or they called us like, hey, we want to activate. You tell us the best way in which we can do that. Again, once House Bill 1136. Once that bill was introduced, it really lit a fire under a number of people in our community. Indianapolis Public Schools has been around, we're coming up on, I think, 140-ish years. Like we are an institution in the city. There are so many people in our city who are alumni of our district. We bear the name of our city. And so to have what felt like a pretty sort of cavalier or, threat to the very existence of our institution, it angered a lot of people. It certainly sort of scared a lot of people. People did not take to that kind of threat lightly. And so the Indianapolis Urban League engaged with us. The African American Coalition of Indianapolis engaged. We were, engaging with our Indianapolis Education Association, our teachers union, to be sure they sort of knew what was happening and why. And they had their own advocacy happening along with the state teachers association.
So the teachers unions were active in this as well, because sometimes you see that there's a disconnect when you've got, parties, legislative, not unions don't always take action when it comes to legislative things. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But in this case, your teachers union was in alignment.
Certainly they were. Yeah. And like I said, they had a sort of a separate advocacy happening that they were leading and executing against. But also we were having conversations. So we sort of had an understanding of what the other was doing and working on. And I think that's a lesson for me, right, is you have stakeholder groups who oftentimes are working toward the same end goal. In this case, it was ensuring that Indianapolis public schools continue to exist as a really important public education institution in our state and in our city. We had different strategies of going about getting to that end goal. And in some cases, we were aligned on the strategy. Sometimes we weren't, and we had to kind of agree to disagree.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the outcome that we were searching for was the same. And so as a superintendent, being able to hold relationships and conversations with all of those constituencies and stakeholder groups was important, because they were both advocating, but also, wanting to hold accountable our team to say, are you fighting hard enough? And what is the message you're bringing forward? And why is that the message you're bringing forward? And so there was a balance there of certainly collaboration and cooperation, but also like accountability and communication of where strategies were aligned and where they might have been different, but all in pursuit of, we desire and believe deeply in Indianapolis public schools and the future of Indianapolis public schools, and we are all going to fight for that.
It's such an amazing way to coalesce around, something. And obviously, as you all are the big dog in the state, I mean, you're the largest district, but there were other districts that were going to be impacted by this, both rural and urban districts. How did you all come together around this issue? Because I know that there were, some other voices at the table to help with this.
Yeah, we, in the session, particularly the rural schools, the Small and Rural Schools Association, that's the Advocacy Association, the State Advocacy Association representing small and rural schools. They certainly had an active and significant voice, particularly during committees when these bills were being considered. That was really helpful. And oftentimes our points, although we're big and urban, we're very similar in nature of the points we're making about the value, right, that public education brings to the communities that we serve. And so that was good. I will say in any of the conversations I had with those leaders, I think it was just the sort of shock and surprise of a bill of that nature coming forward without any
notice or discussion.
Conversation, notice, discussion. It really just took everyone by total surprise. And
I think we're seeing that across the nation, though. It's happening state by state, and it's scary. That it's not kind of scary; it is scary. And
yeah. And oftentimes I think, IPS is sort of big, and for better or worse, we get the spotlight, sometimes in good ways, sometimes not. And that's a part of the deal. And I think oftentimes sort of our smallers or perhaps our rurals are able to feel like, hey, we're just going to kind of be over here doing our work and we're not bothering anybody. We're just going to do what we got to do. And that, I think that mindset, this session shifted.
Change.
Yeah, because it became clear that is not accurate anymore, that we all have to be advocating, like the point you made, telling our stories, both proactively to the extent that we can, and then being ready to respond when there are things coming our way that we don't think are going to serve our kids and community well. It doesn't matter, rural, suburban, urban, everyone has to be prepared and ready, really at all times at this point.
I agree 100%. So since you were able to pull all these different voices and perspectives together, what do you think was the most pivotal messaging, and how did it begin to resonate with the decision makers? Like, when did you see those votes kind of beginning to change, like perspectives like, oh, this is not going to work. Like, we've got to listen to the community. When did you see those legislators begin to pay attention?
I think, and we saw this put forward in a news story after 1136 was introduced. One of the sponsors said, well, we don't actually want to do it. We just wanted to sort of use it to start conversation.
Yeah.
I took deep offense to that, as did many people in our community, because you're talking about parents and children and families and this threat of disrupting. Educators. Yeah. Like disrupting everyone's existence to start a conversation.
Thousands and thousands of people impacted.
Many other ways to start a conversation than to throw the gauntlet with, you're just not going to exist anymore. And so, I think that alone kind of was a spark, right? That like got people very much engaged, and very much feeling like we can have conversations. There are all kinds of things we all know should be better. We can do better, all of those things. But this is not how you start a conversation. And especially when there was, again, no pre-conversation. Like that was the entry point of a conversation.
Right.
And like that, it just can't be the way that we operate. And so I think legislators saw and felt that level of response from people across those communities to say, like, this is absolutely not okay. We are not okay with this.
I love that.
And I think maybe they were underestimating it. Yeah.
I love that idea of the, this isn't the operating model. This isn't how we can succeed together. This isn't how we build healthy young students, if, undermining each other in different ways,
Yeah.
So.
And I think, Indiana is a school choice state. Our leaders will say they are big believers in school choice. They have made policy over the last 3 to 4 budget cycles that sort of supports this premise of, money follows the child. And,
right.
In 2 years, there will be universal vouchers, no income requirement. So all of those things are in play in Indiana. We provide lots of choices to our families in IPS as well. But I think the other message that I think resonated with folks that we talked a lot about in this session that I personally deeply believe in is we've now incentivized schools, families, everyone, look out for yourself.
Yeah.
That's what we have now incentivized. And so this idea, and we're a district who has had deep collaboration with charter schools in the past. I have a charter school background. Mm-hmm. But the policy no longer incentivizes this idea of collaboration. In my opinion, it incentivizes everybody. You look out for yourself. Yeah, because
everybody pit against each other.
That's right. And so
if it's going to be like that, you all have to compete. You all have to do the things to protect your resources. And
right.
And ultimately, that I think is what this bill was forcing you all into. It was forcing you into a war with somebody that could actually be a partner in different ways.
That's exactly right. And that was the point that a number of families, constituents made, is you are creating this us versus them that we don't necessarily want, but we sort of feel forced into operating in because of the policy conditions. And that's a shame, particularly when we consider the needs of so many of our students and our families and our community. And so if the answer is to take already scarce resources and then continue to splinter them versus saying, what do we need to make sure all kids get served well, all of them, sort of regardless of the choice that they make, that should be the question we're trying to answer, versus splintering the resources with no thought as to how do we ensure every student gets what they need to be successful. And that, to me, is where we've missed the mark.
Definitely. So let's talk about what ultimately happened, where you are now, and then we can kind of transition to what next steps look like for the district.
Yeah. So session ended. House Bill 1136, which would have dismantled the district, did not get heard. So it did not move forward. It died. There was another bill, 1501, which would have essentially given control of the district's facilities as well as transportation to 2 separate appointed boards who would have then got to make all the decisions about the use of those assets, transportation and buildings. That bill also died. The language around these, called a facilities pilot, transportation pilot, that language did make it through session and was approved. However, it went from being mandatory that we would have had to participate as IPS to being voluntary across the state for whoever chooses to participate in it. And so that was a win as well. The bill around local property tax sharing with charter schools, it did move forward and was ultimately approved, but on a longer time horizon. Initially, I think it was a 3-year time horizon. It now won't be totally implemented until 2031. And so that has given us more time to think about what adjustments and such might need to be made between now and then. Another priority of our board was to ensure that local voices were a part of thinking about what the local education landscape may need to change and look like. And so they advocated for the creation of an Indianapolis Local Education Alliance.
What's the alliance? What does that do? Like, who's that made up of?
And so the mayor is the chair. I'm a member. The board president was able to select a member. I was able to select 2 parents. One who attends our traditional schools, one who attends one of our charter schools.
Cool.
And then the mayor had 3 additional appointments. So there's a group of 9 of us who will be meeting.
A good working size, like where things can get done.
That's right. We had our first kickoff meeting in June. We'll meet monthly with the requirement of submitting a report back to the General Assembly, the Secretary of Education, our board, around how we might think about resource allocation more coherently than what exists right now. And so how might we take what right now is a pretty fragmented system and create some coherence around it, which is no small task, and certainly in 6 months' time, but we're going to do the best that we can to bring forward some recommendations that we think will be helpful, and do those prior to the next legislative session starting in January of 26. And so that's what that group was tasked to do. When that language was first introduced, it was actually the governor who would get to appoint all of the people on the alliance. And so again, we were able to advocate to our state legislators and say the whole point of having this alliance was for it to be local. And so we're able to get that language,
like local control of really being able to have that voice.
That's right. So we were able to get the language shifted to be representative of local folks, not state leaders appointing folks, to our local
that have no understanding of the local environment, the challenges, the assets, all of those things.
Right. And so that, again, we had advocated for the creation of it. It got in, but was not the way that we had initially advocated for it to look. And so we were able to get that shifted to be more reflective of what the actual desire was, when we put forward those guiding priorities and principles. So that alliance has, like I said, has met once. We'll meet again here in a couple of weeks for the July meeting. We, as a part of session and a part of having the internal capacity, were able to put out a weekly just legislative updates and build that sort of mailing list of folks who could stay engaged and aware of what's happening. That was really, really helpful. We've built out a whole page on our website that sort of during session would walk through, here's this bill, here's our response to this bill, here's what this bill would do. Just trying to equip, people
and educate and build awareness of everyone.
Like folks have a lot going on in their lives. And so to the extent that we could put forward something that's sort of easily to digest and give you a quick reference of what's going on, and make sure it's a frequent touch point, we were able to do that. And that was also great because I saw other organizations referencing the language from our website.
That's when you're winning is when your messaging gets repeated.
And so it was great. It was great. Yeah, that folks felt like they had a tool to help them understand as well, and support them in advocating as well. So I felt really good that we saw that play out in a number of instances with folks who were also advocating on behalf of the district.
Okay, that's awesome. There are so many things to take away from this conversation, from, bringing in new resources, being organized, just paying attention to the larger ecosystem and knowing what's going on. I think the big takeaway really is this idea of collaboration at all levels, like from the board to the larger community, with your families, even down to what you're just talking about with the education and the awareness. The more information that everyone has, the better we're all able to work together to move opinion and to really then level that playing field. We're out there and we're telling the truth, we're stating facts, and we're getting people to the table to protect public education.
That's right.
One of the things I want to do before we close out is I really want you to talk about the power of pride. So when I was prepping for this conversation, I was watching videos of you.
We do a lot of those. We do a lot of those.
Like your little stalker. One of the things that I watched, and it was after all of this, and it was such an impassioned opening to what could have been a very dry conversation. You're talking about legislature and bills, and I mean, that's why we have a cartoon about how bills are made. Yeah. It's not exciting stuff. It's not, but you led with the passion that is embedded in just such a legacy within IPS. And can you just speak to that and how that is, I think, honestly, that's what got you to your win.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I, just finished my 10th year as a part of Team IPS, my 6th year as superintendent, not from here. But like I said, there are so many people that IPS is a part of their life story. And it can be easy to kind of dismiss that or undervalue that. And while this legislative session was incredibly hard, incredibly challenging, the amount of time and just emotional energy, it was hard. But what it did for me personally, and I think for a lot of people in our community and our educators and our, staff and students, is say IPS matters, and it matters to a lot of people, and not just historically matters because what it's done in the past, but it matters now because of what it's doing for kids now.
Yes.
And there are families who are choosing intentionally to be a part of our community, and they place tremendous value in their school and in their teachers and in this community. And I just think that continuing to remind ourselves of that, to talk about that connection and the power of our district and all the ways in which we are working really hard to serve students well, and all the ways that is happening, both historically and now,
right,
it's critically important. Yeah. It's critically important. It just, you just can't, it can be really, even transparently when you said, the wins you got. And I was like, did we get wins? Oh my gosh. But then I thought about that from session and I was like, you know what? Yeah. We did. There are some things that could have been, that could have literally ended the existence of our district. And we were able to, alongside community folks, say no. And to sort of put forward a message that I think a lot of folks found resonant and were able to get on board with us around in a really, really powerful way. And so, this idea of no one can tell our story better than we can.
That's right.
We have to not be afraid to tell that story or ashamed to tell that story. We have to be really thoughtful and intentional about telling it, probably to the place where we feel like I've said it a million times, which means you probably got to say it a million more. Exactly. Because no one's going to do it for us. We have to do that. And I think the thing we've actually gotten pushed on, and I'm thinking a lot about too, from our families is they want they want to help tell that story. They want to be equipped with tools to also be helpful.
They believe in the district and they believe in the future. They know what is possible.
That's right. That's right. And so I think that's, when you think about next steps, that's something I'm thinking a lot about is you have families and folks who are saying, use us. Let us help you do this work. You don't have to carry the load by yourself.
And I think that is such a powerful way to close this. Your families in all districts across the country are the strength and are the voice of so much. And I mean, it doesn't negate the voice of the teachers or the staff and administrators, but our families are hidden just resources that are impacted every single day by the work that your professionals are doing. And they do want to share. They want to be a part. They want to contribute. And
that's right.
I think oftentimes we forget to engage them. Or we don't necessarily engage them as fully as we could because it does require work. It's hard. Mm-hmm. It's hard,
Mm-hmm. It's really hard.
Engagement is hard, but it's clear from the work that you have done that it's beneficial. And,
for sure.
And
we haven't found, I wouldn't say we've arrived at this point yet. I think we took a step in a really great direction. And I think there's more to do and more that our families want us to do and, are going to hold us accountable to doing.
Yeah.
But, I think if nothing else, this session in time showed me, right, that we don't have to do it and go at it alone, that we've got a city full of folks who are cheering for us, some of them really loudly, some of them kind of quietly. We got to get them to be a little bit louder, but who want this district to survive, to thrive, and who appreciate and place a very high value on Indianapolis Public Schools and what it means as an institution. And we have to continue to be loud and proud about that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. I think everyone out there listening and watching, you are not alone. There are resources out there. We're going to take Dr. Johnson's words and building those relationships will help you move forward to be competitive and to do the things that you need to do to protect your districts. So everybody, make sure you're checking out Public Education Unfiltered, and Brian will likely be back for the next podcast, but you never know. I might be here too. Everybody,
thank you, Paige. I enjoyed it.